The first thing I wanted to do was give you a little context for where we are in this room, in this actual building today, as well as where we are in the history of the kind of watershed and the issue of forest loss. So we think of the Delaware, we think of the Delaware River, right? Iconic images of the Delaware River that come to mind. This one, of course, is familiar with, certainly I would think all of you, Washington crossing the Delaware. It's the one thing I learned about the Delaware in my history class growing up in Jenkintown, not too far from here. But there's other iconic images. Again, the Delaware River. This is a picture of the Delaware Water Gap, another familiar site for many of us. Mount Tammany, beautiful spot. We started to see some of the natural splendor and wonder of the Delaware showcased a little bit better here. Another iconic image, certainly for folks like myself who work and live in Philadelphia, the Ben Franklin Bridge crossing the Delaware between Philadelphia and Camden. The Delaware is also the state boundary between Pennsylvania and Jersey, and unfortunately for many that is all it exists as for them, just something they need to pay $5 to drive across as part of their work commute. But I want to introduce you to one more image, iconic image of the Delaware. We'll call this Lord Delaware. Some of you might recognize it as having other associations with the New Yorker, but I'm going to convince you this is Lord Delaware, namesake for our river, and it's an image, a shape I want you guys, you're going to see a lot of over the course of the next slide. So there he is, Lord Delaware of the Delaware River watershed. And that is why. That is why the image that I want in your brains. The Delaware is not just a river, right? It's not just a river that you have to cross that forms a state boundary. It's the river itself, the main stem itself, but it's also all the thousands of tributaries and the lands that those tributaries drain that form the Delaware River watershed. And it's really that larger watershed system that I want to talk to you guys about today, and the landscape issues that are confronting that watershed system, and the consequences for the quality and supply of our drinking water and water for ecosystems, healthy communities, everything that's connected to that. Some additional local context, just for, again, orientation. So here we have the main stem of the Delaware River, right, the state boundary. We also have us here at Montgomery County Community College West Campus in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. So that's that push pin right there. We are in, adjacent to the Manatawny Creek and the Manatawny Creek watershed. So you heard Cherry mention Manatawny, so that's it right there, which is part of the larger Schuylkill River watershed, right? So watersheds, again, this system of nested drainages, one river flowing into another, adding up to this larger whole, but all connected and related. One more stream I want to highlight for you folks is French Creek. You'll hear a little bit about French Creek and some projects in French Creek specifically in the middle part of my presentation here. So one more image here to show you guys. So this is a fun postcard I found thanks to the Citizens for Historic Preservation here in Pottstown. So that same view as the satellite image from Google Earth on top. But where are we, right? Where are we currently sitting? This is the footprint of the Montgomery County Community College West Campus. Previously forested only, 30, 40 years ago, maybe, that this picture was taken. And the footprint of the parking lot that you parked in when you came in, the building itself, that's about a 5-acre footprint. So we're going to talk a lot about acres. We're going to look a lot at that Lord Delaware image, and I want just to have everyone to have some context for some of the numbers in terms of acreage that I'll be throwing out there. That's a lovely wooded lot if that's in your backyard, if that's a small park that you have access to. There's a lot of pleasure to be derived there from a recreational perspective, and certainly also for habitat, and as you'll be hearing more about for water quality as well. So 5 acres is small, but it's got immense value in the right situation, right context. So a little refresher, why are forests important? I don't have to sell the conservation community, the environmental community represented in this room about why forests are important, but I want to cover a few of the basics. The forest-water connection is so intimate. The forests are the source of our clean water supply. The forests themselves, right, that natural land cover infiltrates the rain. It actually supports and feeds back into the precipitation that falls on our watershed, right, through evapotranspiration, through that water cycle. But the water, as it falls on a forested landscapes, it's infiltrated into the soil. Those roots that penetrate the soil let that water seep in. The fungus, the mycorrhizae, the organisms that live in that soil, live in those root structures, all have these biological processes that are treating, breaking down contaminants, filtering our water supply before letting it controlling its entry into our streams and rivers, right? Letting that slow, manageable seep of base flow, seep of groundwater into our rivers and streams to control any tendency towards flash flooding or erosion, any other issues. So there's the water quality benefit of the forest in terms of filtration. There's that storage of the groundwater in that root system, that soil system, as well as actual treatment and preservation of water quality. It's not just those ecosystem and environmental benefits. We can put dollars on this too. This is a nationwide study of treatment costs, the chemical treatment costs of actually putting those treatment chemicals into our drinking water treatment plants. And that's the relationship with forest cover for the source water area for a drinking water treatment system. Every 10% of 10% loss of forest cover for your source water area is equates to or relates to anywhere from an 8 to 20% increase in the chemical cost of treating that source water supply before it can be used for drinking water. So that's a little bit of the value of forests. It's time to start, unfortunately, getting into some of the threats and things we should be concerned about, right? Our footprint on the watershed has grown dramatically. This is a satellite photo from space of just the lights, nighttime lighting, just kind of a good indicator, a good sense of what our footprint on the landscape actually looks like. If you were in space, you could see this view yourself. The population of the Delaware River Basin is also represented in that graph. I mean, with more population and more growth, that footprint is ever expanding, right? And that is cause for concern. So 8.5 million people living in the watershed and counting. And interesting, you'll hear this fact, it's in the program, 8.5 million people living in the watershed, maybe 95% drinking water from the watershed, but the watershed also supplies the drinking water for New York City. So a lot more than 8 million people are actually drinking our water. So the stakes are high. So as development, as growth occurs, as development occurs, we're introducing impervious surface, right? We're replacing that forest with asphalt, with parking lots, with wonderful educational opportunities in community colleges. But there's a cost, right? There's an impact on the water quality. This is an image of the impervious cover model developed by some researchers affiliated with the Center for Watershed Protection. And it's held up over time. There's always debate about where those thresholds are. But this is a good rule of thumb, a good guide in thinking about the health of our watershed and its ability to support clean water. How much impervious cover, what percentage of that drainage area is covered by pavement, roof, asphalt, et cetera? In the Schuylkill River, we look at the entire system and we see 28% impervious, right? In that not supporting a healthy ecosystem. When we look at the Delaware River, with those forested headwaters higher up, which we'll see more about, we've got a slightly better number. And look at those smaller nested systems for French Creek. Again, that stream we're going to return to later, we'll look at 18% developed. So the forested landscapes are disappearing, largely getting replaced by that impervious cover. So you saw a photo from space on the last image. Those same satellites able to take those kind of photos are interpreting that data, interpreting those pictures, and turning them into land-covered data. So this map you see up here is that data represented. Each pixel on that map has been analyzed based on the wavelengths that are bouncing back up off of it and tagged as either being forest, a signature that corresponds to forest, or impervious cover, agriculture, cropland. So the green layers there are the forested parts of our watershed. But it's a tough thing to estimate. Those satellites are far away. The resolution isn't great, and our depending on the data source that you see, both the amount of forest cover in the basin and the rate at which we're losing that forest cover can vary. And those are the three different lines you see on this graph up here. These different estimates of forest loss. The numbers aren't good, right? Regardless of the data set you look at, you're still looking at upwards of 5,000 acres of forest loss every year. 5,000, 1,000 Montgomery County Community College West campuses every year. But we now have even better tools at our disposal to help us look at this question of forest loss across the watershed. New LiDAR technology integrates lasers, range-finding lasers, effectively, with the traditional photography of remote sensing to develop these land-covered data sets. And you can just see the remarkable increase in resolution and in accuracy that you get with these new data sets. So before we had this 30-meter pixel that we could look at with the satellite-based land-covered data set. With this LiDAR technology, we've got down to 1 meter. And the difference between 30 meters and 1 meter is there. And just the high level of accuracy, we can really drill into this specifics of on-the-ground land cover. So this is the view out my office window. And this is that view and the data that's underneath it. So this is an excerpt of that same 1 meter land covered data, just to give you a sense of the amazing resolution we're dealing with here. Those are tree planters. It blows my mind. You know, that's data. That's not a photo from space of tree planters. That's actual data telling me that there is a tree in that decorative planter. But you know, there's some kinks to get worked out of the system. That is AstroTurf on that soccer field on top of Abington Friends Select School, not grassy turf. So you know, some improvements to make. The scientists, don't worry, we can continue to improve your toys. So we've got some new estimates. We have this new data set giving us new estimates of forest cover and forest loss. 4.8 million, you know, instead of 4.5, we're up to 4.8. It's good news, right? 58% forested. That's more than half. It's something to get excited about, but when we look at the rates of forest loss, the rates are still so dramatic. Anywhere from 2,000 acres of forest being lost up to 5,000, depending on whether the development that's going in is including a vegetation. So it turns out that a developed land use, right, that red area, isn't all asphalt. We have trees in our backyards. We have street trees. We are living under the forest canopy in many of our communities. And that's what this graph depicts, that relative amount of forest cover in each of the different land classes of a kind of traditional low-resolution land-covered data set. So when you look at the bottom there, that developed area, you can see there's anywhere between 10 and 40% of a developed class or traditionally developed class land coverage actually has trees on it. But that doesn't happen by accident, right? That's intentional. That's an intentional practice, leaving trees behind, planting trees to replace those that are cleared for residential development. And we'll hear more about that. So, you know, maybe it's 2,500, maybe it's 5,000. It's still a lot of trees, right? Like, what does that feel like? That amount of tree, like, you know, many of us in this room, you know, we do these tree planting projects, the reforestation, the street tree planting, Riparian Buffer. PHS has its Plant 1 Million program that they're still, you know, they're making great progress on. But that amount of acreage, that loss of acreage, is still between 500,000 up to 1 million of trees that are being felled, being lost to the system. All those drinking water quality, ecosystem benefits lost to the system every year. So I try and plant maybe 10 trees each year as part of the Tree Tenders program, but man, that's a lot of weekends. So we should still worry. But there are tools in our toolkit. One of the most important tools in our toolkit is forest protection, actual on-the-ground forest protection. And joining me from Montgomery County Community College main campus is Peter Howell with the Open Space Institute to talk about that.
I just hit this. Wait, this? Okay. So I am the hope part of the presentation. I think Nathan has really warmed you up to the problem that we face, and I love those presentations that calculate loss in terms of football fields. Someone from Rutgers did one recently I saw where the whole slide was, it's 10, 12, 18 football fields of forest that we lose a day or a week. So I'm going to try to give you a little hope. So what do we do? So not all forest land is equal. When you're thinking about water quality, some forest land is more important than others. And in general, headwaters forests and riparian forests are more important to ensure water quality than other kinds of forests in general. And so of those forests, those that are most threatened are obviously those that we need to focus on. So given this huge amount of forest loss, the real challenge for us is how do we triage and how do we prioritize? So one way to prioritize is to focus. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the on-the-ground work that my organization, the Open Space Institute, is involved in the Delaware River Basin. And these are some of the clusters that are part of this Delaware River Watershed Initiative. And this gives us one way to focus. And these were chosen as places that contain intact forest land that we want to keep that way for water quality, and also places that are degraded where water quality is not great and we need to restore them. So one way to concentrate impact, how do we do that? Well, actually I'll flip this side and just tell you these are 3 ways that we've thought about doing this, and I'm just going to focus on one. But we think about the context of a watershed. And when I say a watershed, I'm talking about, say, a HUC 12, which is a hydrological unit classification code. And that's about 40,000 acres. And those HUC 12s are nested in bigger HUC 12s and bigger, and then you get to a river basin. So we want to look at, well, what's the quality of that watershed? And there are about 800 of those HUC 12s that are within the entire Delaware River Basin. We also look at, well, what's the quality of the piece of forest? Does it have recharge? Does it have active river area, which is this area along the river of wetlands? Does it contain headwaters? And then finally, if we don't protect that piece of forest land, what will happen? What kinds of negative impacts will there be on water quality? So those are the 3 things that we look at. But I want to just talk about one of them right now in the interest of time, and that has to do with watershed context. So you're looking at a map of a lot of blue and gray, tan and brown. And those are all those HUC 12s, those 800 HUC 12s throughout the river basin. And they're basically ranked according to, we created an index that took 7 different variables. I'm not going to explain all of them, but they involve riparian cover and groundwater recharge, and how many cool water streams there are. And we created an index to basically rank and rate them, and we weighted them and created thresholds, and that's how we got to the blue places that are basically intact watersheds that are producing clean water right now. And they're typically found in headwaters forests. And then the places that are not producing clean water, as you would imagine, are places that are either pretty heavily intensively farmed areas, or places that are developed with lots of stormwater runoff. And so out of that is produced this, and this helps us deal with this morass of hopelessness that Nathan has offered us. And so we can kind of look at specific watersheds, and we can look at specific parcels and rate and rank them, and we can look at them in places that are blue, that are very intact up in the Poconos, and also in the upper Lehigh. And we can also look at some mixed, what we call mixed-use landscapes, one of which we're very close to, and I'll talk about in a second. So I want to give a shout out to Claire Jantz, who's done some marvelous work that you all know, because science is really important to tell us what is most important to protect and what's least, but we also have to deal with that issue of, well, what's really necessary to protect? So Claire has done some groundbreaking research. So Claire's model, which you may know, has established a growth model using what's known as a sleuth model. And if you have a lot of time, you can have her explain it. But it basically looks at a number of things, including what are the available zoning, how much can you develop according to zoning and rules, but also how much can you develop that can actually be developed that's not so steep slope. So the long and the short of it is that, what did I do? Hit the escape key, there we go, okay. So basically this is a very summative conclusion that shows you in 2011 what the shape of what our footprint was, and in 2070 what it could be, and she's developed various scenarios, and you'll see that the basic footprint grows around places that are currently developed. Well, one of the things I'm struck by is how much lower density development, but still development, there's going to be in all those forests that Nathan's talked about. And that is reflected in the growing pink that you see in the upper part of the basin. So we face a real big issue here, which is basically a death by 1,000 cuts in my mind. Yeah, we'll just do it this way. So another tool I won't go into too much, I'll refer to it in a second, is this stream reach assessment tool. Nathan talked about the availability of data and technology, and we know so much more than we used to. This is a terrific tool, if you can check it out, if you haven't already, that can help you look at specific stream reaches off the Schuylkill that are feeding into the Schuylkill, for example, and where are the pollutants, what are the pollutant loads, and where are they coming from. So I want to give you just a brief overview of, so what have we done? How much land have we protected? What progress are we making compared to the losses of forest land? So in the last 4 years, our organization has made about $8.2 million of grants to protect about 20,000 acres of land that are shown in those dots. Not all the projects have closed. These are land acquisition projects that are protecting forest land in those critical areas that we talked about. I have a sheet that I can hand out at the end so you don't have to try to decipher it. But these have been 46 different projects, about 20,000 acres. The money we've put in has been leveraged with about $6 or $7 other dollars. That's what represents the $55 million. But since not every acre is the same and there's certain acres more important, we track things like, well, how many headwaters, acres of headwaters forests were protected, or how many wetlands were protected, or how many miles of stream of shoreline were protected. And those are actually the most important metrics. So since we're pretty close to the Schuylkill Highlands, or we're actually in the Schuylkill Highlands, and some of the big protected lands are just south of us, I thought it might be interesting just to show you a sequence of slides showing what's happened in that region. So the Schuylkill Highlands, which all of you know and abuts the Schuylkill River, is a fascinating area. It includes some really important creeks. It's an area of mixed use. It includes some forest land interspersed with agriculture and development. It's very important biologically, and it's also very important for water quality. The city of Philadelphia, this is its watershed, part of its watershed. So we're right there, right at the tip. And again, these are the blue maps you might recognize. So the blue are those places that are producing clean water, and the brown tannish are places that are not. And the brown and tannish are where there's development, and the lighter colors are where there's agriculture. So this is an area that's very, very important. It's so interesting that the Schuylkill Highlands has, despite this mixed use, it has some of the highest quality streams in the state. These are the exceptional value and the high quality streams. These are just the exceptional value streams that are shown. And in general, as you look at the forest land that we've added, there's a lot of interesting forest land that is in part of the region, and it is often where the headwaters of these streams are located, and actually where they've been protected. But it's interspersed with a lot of agriculture, as you can see here. Thankfully, it's not heavily intensive agriculture like further south, but it still is agriculture that represents threats to water quality. And of course, the dominant feature of this region has been encroaching suburban development that is basically parcelizing the land, causing runoff, threatening and scouring streams, and ultimately threatening water quality. This is the stream reach assessment tool. I don't want you to look at it too closely, but basically the French Creek, which is that little, I actually have something here. Isn't that interesting? Which is right here, which is one of those high value streams. Well, when you follow that stream up into the protected lands, it's of very high quality. As it comes down here, it goes through this area, which is more developed, and this is a slide that enables you to zero in on a stream. And what this slide is telling me is that we have 0.61 acres per pounds per acre of phosphorus that is loading on this stream reach, and that's about double what the state level is. So if we're going to succeed in this region, we've got to keep protecting and restoring these high quality streams before they decline. And this is really the challenge we face in this region. So this is the assemblage of protected land. It is an amazing piece of work done by hopefully some people in this room, I think. And we're trying to build on that right now. These are the projects that we have supported in the first phase. It only amounts to 500 acres, and you would say at that level, we're never going to keep pace with Nathan. In fact, at 20,000 acres over 4 years, and we've lost 5 a year, we're just treading water, right? But it depends where these are protected, and some of them are protected along key stream reaches that I just pointed out to you. And our challenge in the coming year is to do more work of this sort, and the groups working in this region in the next 3-4 years want to quadruple the amount of protected land, forest land, working on these key stream reaches. They also want to educate landowners. There's a big push on regulatory reform to work with local municipalities to improve their land uses, their ordinances that will protect natural resources. One thing I want to point out here is there's this neat little project. I don't know if we have anyone from French and Pickering Land Trust here. Yes, praise the Lord. So 16 years is this just terrific project. And you're looking at it here. It's about 100 acres. The yellow are areas that are outlining stream buffers. And you'll see there's a stream here that is forested there. This one, not so much. This is an easement that we help to fund in which these buffer regions will be off limits to farming. This will be allowed to reforest, and it's a model of what we need to do. Forest land on farms is really important because it helps to filter all the sediments and keep water clean. And farmers can do their part, and this is a terrific project that shows the importance of forested buffers on farms. And in a mixed-use landscape like the one I'm describing, these patches of forest are absolutely essential to keep the water clean, or at least to keep it from getting worse. So if you know somebody with a farm and they have riparian buffers, they've got to protect it. One final word, don't forget incentives. On-the-ground work of the sort we're doing is absolutely essential. Policy work, which Nathan's going to talk to you about some more, is essential too. But how do we create incentives for private landowners to do the right thing, just like those farmers? You're looking at a number of forest landowners and the Nature Conservancy staff here on the right on a piece of land up in the Poconos where a hunt club has donated the easement on the land. The Nature Conservancy has helped them enroll their project in the California Carbon Credit Program. It's very complicated, but in essence, if you're a polluter in California, you're allowed to buy a credit if you don't pollute too much, but over a certain level. And the way you can buy a credit, one way you can buy a credit, is to pay landowners in Pennsylvania to sequester carbon by managing their forests well and protecting them. These landowners are going to get $200,000 to $300,000 from the carbon program to help protect their land. We're looking at how do we expand those incentives on a larger scale for forest landowners throughout the Delaware River Basin so we can augment that 20,000 acres and maybe make it 30, 40, or 50. But keep that in mind, and I'm going to turn it back to my partner in crime here. Here we go.
So the importance of protecting forests on the ground can't be overstated. But I want to give you guys some more tools, or highlight some more tools that many of you are already using to help us accelerate that rate of protection and layer in even more protections to get to the targets and the outcome we need for a healthy Delaware River watershed. It's a lot of forested land in the Delaware, but it's a lot of unprotected forested land. And how long, is it going to take to get everything? This is just an exercise of looking at everything that's currently protected in a protected lands database, excluding easements for ag, to really kind of drill in on the forest cover versus the outstanding forested acres. From the work that Peter and the Open Space Institute have done, we know that the average cost per acre for these conservation projects is about $5,500. So we do a little bit of arithmetic. We plot it out over time. Anyway, so the arithmetic takes $16 billion to protect the 3 million acres outstanding. But it takes time, right? We don't do it all at once. We do it over time. That's that rate of forest loss over time. And Peter mentioned the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, and that's roughly the rate of funding that the Delaware River Watershed Initiative is putting in. And where those two lines intersect, right, is where we've protected everything that's available. Given the current loss rate, given the rate of protection, this is where we end up. How many hundreds of years out is that? But we know we don't do it alone. the Delaware River Watershed Initiative is an important project and is demonstrating a lot of really important approaches to land protection. But this light green line is a more close approximation of the kind of the current amount of funding that's being spent on forested protection across the entire Delaware River watershed, different sources, public, private. But still, I can't wait that long. I can't wait that long to reach parity. We got to look at other tools to get the kind of protection we need, protect the status quo as much as we can while we make gains and accelerate protection. So one of the points that Peter mentioned that I want to reiterate is that opportunity we have to focus on headwaters areas and the smaller priority geographies. And we saw this image before, what's the status of French Creek, being impaired when you look at the entire system, right? That's really evaluating that impaired status at the bottom of the watershed. But when we start to focus on those catchments, those areas that are producing higher quality water, we see how we can actually we can win on these smaller landscapes. So that's a quite small catchment within French Creek, but it's the catchment that the 16 acres project sits within. And all of a sudden you see the shift, the balance is a little bit different. You have a stream that's right on the edge there, but it's currently supporting a desirable use, right? So we protect that small catchment, that small area, and we've protected that use. It frees us, right, to look at other priorities. What's the next priority? So such an important strategy in prioritizing and focusing for land conservation, even under that current kind of status quo regime. But I want us to think about tools to accelerate our wins, right? Accelerate our gains. And to do that, we've got to think a little bit about what's driving the forest loss. So this is a compilation of an analyses that the William Penn Foundation supported and that were ultimately conducted by CNA Institute for Public Research. We hear a lot about shale gas, fracking, pipelines, the threat of energy infrastructure. And so we looked at this question. We looked at how pipelines that are proposed for the watershed are going to cut through that forested area and drive forest loss. We looked at how at the moratorium, which is so important for the Delaware River watershed, but if that moratorium is listed, what's the footprint of all those well pads and roads and gathering lines, all that infrastructure? And of course, there's a whole other suite of issues around fracking waste and all manner of contamination threats. But just from the forest loss protection alone, we looked at that issue, quantified that potential forest loss. But then we also looked at residential, right? And voila, here is the culprit that we really need to think about. And I'm going to talk about some policies that help us think about that, that footprint of all those homes, developments, et cetera, across the landscape, and how we can, again, minimize their impact. So the first solution, right, it's a solution so many of you are already focused on, is simply responsible homeowner practices. The difference in these two rate curves, the extreme forest loss that takes us out to, 2,225 versus this reduced forest loss rate. The difference between these two rate curves is a matter of, it gives us more time, right? If we can reduce, or if we can increase the amount of forests that are actually being planted on development. We make sure that we do responsible clearing when we're building our homes, our shopping malls. We're doing our street trees. We're doing our backyard habitat. All those responsible homeowner practices so that the footprint of our development can be more green, right? You saw that range earlier between 10% and 40% of developed land use is actually forested. Let's push that edge, right? Push to that 40% in all of our development activities. And you can have a dramatic impact on the amount of forest we'll ultimately be able to protect. Another really important tool is responsible zoning. Responsible zoning, planning, and development. That map you saw earlier of the residential footprint in the watershed, that's based on an average parcel size for residential development of about 1/2 to 0.65 acres per parcel. That's a big parcel, and they're more likely to be bigger up in the higher, more rural aspects of the watershed than in the urban area. But let's reduce that parcel size. We get a 1/4 acre parcel, we do some of this cluster zoning, we protect open space, and ultimately, again, we buy ourselves even more time to spend the available conservation dollars on land protection and get an even higher right? An even higher amount of forest protected over the long haul. And we absolutely are in it for the long haul. Smart growth, right? Thinking about density, thinking about that smaller parcel size, that smaller footprint. We also just need more money. We need more public revenue. That $50 million a year that's being currently spent is nowhere near enough. And many of the environmental organizations and watershed organizations that work in the Delaware River watershed are doing their best to change just that. So these are several of the different campaigns, the state-specific campaigns, as well as a federal project that promise to add tens of additional millions of dollars, if successful. The Keep It Green program in New Jersey has largely been successful. That $20 million extra dollars a year will be spent on conservation and land protection in the Delaware River watershed over the next year or two. Delaware, Pennsylvania, we still have a ways to go, even to achieve those modest targets of an additional $10 or $8 million per year. And while the Delaware River Basin Conservation Act created a Delaware River watershed restoration program at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, that program has not yet been funded. There's not yet been an appropriation to actually invest in these important conservation practices. So we make those programs successful, and just like that, we accelerate the rate at which we are able to protect land. What a dramatic difference. All of a sudden, we're looking at 4.5 million acres of protected land, a much higher percentage of the watershed protected, and a much closer end date. It's still, I don't think I'm making it to 2200, but we push that up a little closer. But that's not the only tool we can think about, right? This idea of additional revenue. Who is benefiting the most from this clean and abundant water that our watershed lands, our healthy watershed lands, are producing? Well, yes, it's nature, it's ecosystems, it's plants and animals. It's also people, right? These are the water withdrawals that are being taken out of various tributaries in the main stem of the Delaware River Basin. These are the water withdrawals. I think it's an annual basis, or a daily basis, excuse me. So 886 million gallons a day. We're already charging our water users 8 cents per 10,000 gallons? Yeah, per 10,000 or 1,000 gallons. 8 cents per 1,000 gallons to use that water. We increased that fee 1 cent per 1,000 gallons. This is exercises that Jerry Kaufman at University of Delaware has been instrumental in leading and thinking about. 1 additional cent per 1,000 gallons. We dedicate that money for both protection and restoration, and you are really, that's our state funding goals, our federal funding goals. But we introduced this new fee, and you just see the rate of our available protection skyrocket even higher, right? So 1 cent per 1,000 gallons, plus our Growing Greener programs, our Keep It Green programs at the state, federal, and local levels, and you're really starting to approach a goal, protecting the status quo that we can get excited about and feel hopeful about. But that's not it. There's still more tools in the toolkit. One last tool I want to share with you guys that Peter was talking about is that importance of the riparian buffer. We need to protect those forested, vegetated areas alongside our waterways. These amazing habitat, amazing filter strips for all the runoff from farm fields, from developments, parking lots, you name it, slowed down, soaked up by those vegetated riparian buffers for a huge impact on water quality. Now, Peter also mentioned the high quality and exceptional value streams in Pennsylvania, and this map that you see up here shows in green the streams across all 4 states that comprise the Delaware River Basin that have that higher designation. Maybe it's HQEV in Pennsylvania, it's Category 1 in New Jersey. Each state has a different approach, but one thing they have in common is that they're all triggering setback requirements, buffer requirements to try and leave that area vegetated, let forests grow and thrive in those important buffer zones. So there's a lot of blue streams there. The buffer protections are not 100% solution. There's violation issues, compliance issues. It's not always possible everywhere. Sometimes development has already occurred. But let's extend those buffer protections. What if we extended them to that entire blue streams there across the entire watershed? We go 100. Science shows us 100 feet away from the stream is going to get you really maximum water quality protections, maximize your benefit. Let's get 100 feet away from the stream across that entire blue area. You're adding 600,000 acres of full protected forest into our toolkit there. So there you are with that accelerated level of funding. let's add the buffers. Add the buffers, and then you got that light blue line, and well, 2085. I might make it to 2085, and certainly your children, your grandchildren are going to be there at 2085, right? This is a future we can grasp, a future that is real. There's not just the state programs for buffers, there's a lot that can be done locally. This last chart I'll leave you with is, again, to kind of emphasize that whether you're working at the state level or the local level, these tools are available to you on a per home basis, on a per municipality, per county basis. This is an assessment that was led by the Clean Water Fund, Clean Water Action, in partnership with some others to look at across the 5-county region, around Philadelphia, and assess the state of local ordinances to protect these buffers. Again, not just the state that does this. Local communities can require these same setbacks for development, as well as all those other practices around smart planning, smart development, smart growth. So without local action, really the fate of our watershed is in your hands. And I want to leave you with this, I think, amazing quote from Luna Leopold. The health of our waters, right? It's the primary measure of how we live on the land, that inextricable land-water connection. I hope I left you with some sense of urgency around this action, but I hope we also left you with some hope. It's been a pleasure speaking with you guys, and we look forward. I think we have some time for questions, so thank you again.
Thank you. Front and center.
Good? All right. I sometimes work in urban planning. I was really glad to see that you talked a little bit about smart growth. And I'm curious, I was fascinated by I guess it was Claire's work projecting development patterns into 2070. And I'm wondering if you've ever looked at if our local zoning ordinances allowed or even required more compact form of development, would that map look the same? Because I shared your horror at the pink all over that second map.
Well, I'm going to probably let the person right behind you stand up, but she has done some conservation scenarios. Do you want to just, can we let Claire just respond to that briefly?
All right, thanks. And I'm actually going to be talking about this a little bit in my session.
You
so
can
just
promote
a
your
plug
session.
For that 10-15 session. But yeah, we did run a baseline scenario. We ran a scenario that kind of maximized sprawl around transportation networks. And then we also ran a conservation scenario, which was really focused on clustering development around places that are already existing. And we have an online map tool that you can use that I think Nathan included, or Peter included, the website at drbproject.org, where you can actually explore that for those very small watershed areas.
And I should say that Claire did a little more intensive runs of some things in one region, and depending on your interest who asked the question, you can kind of localize it, honing in on certain regions of interest.
And I'll just add quickly too that so many of these decisions are being made locally, and there's over 800 local municipalities across the watershed. So it is an interesting and compelling research project, an analysis project, but it requires that local familiarity, that grassroots action, the kind of relationships and connections that individuals like yourselves have. So I think if we can harness both, we stand a good chance at better taking advantage of those tools.
Good morning. Thanks both for the bright and the gloom and doom. I think we really need that kind of contrast here. My name is Wendy Lathrop. I'm not affiliated with any particular organization. I'm just here because of everything that goes on here. My question is related to the microcosm that's in my area. I live all the way on the very far east end of Montgomery County, 3 blocks from the city limits in Philadelphia. And it's an old neighborhood, and we have old hardwoods. And I'm wondering if the microcosm of infestations and diseases that we're seeing affect our trees. We've been losing elms Dutch elm disease has, just 2 years ago, my neighbor lost those trees. I have ashes that are not doing well, and I'm afraid that's going to weaken them for the ash borers. We have oaks that seem to be infected with some kind of a thing that's making them have dieback and losing maples as well. And I'm wondering if this is something that's more than just our area, and if it's going to also affect our larger watershed protection efforts as well. Thank you.
Well, and just wait till the red oak, I don't know how much of that we have, but there's all kinds of new diseases that are coming that are spreading virally through tree roots, being spread by birds, like a killer pollinator, but more on the hope. Yeah, no, I'm about hope. No, there's a lot of research underway at Cornell, also at the Institute for Ecosystem Studies up in New York in Millbrook, that is looking at some of the vectors and what are the causes of this. A lot of it, there's invasives. A lot of it's related to climate change, frankly, and that's where most of the work, and that's actually the scary part, because it's hard to know what to do about that. But there is some research, and I can share it with some of the coordinators here, make it available on some of the causes of these mortalities and in sort of diseases, tree diseases. It's not encouraging. It's not encouraging, unfortunately. Do you want to add anything?
Again, I'll just add that to emphasize again the points made earlier about the need for revenue. These solutions are expensive in fighting these invasives, fighting these diseases. And I know I referenced, for example, the Growing Greener funding package that conservationists are working on to pass and advance in Pennsylvania. That $10–12 million for land protection, I think maybe it's about $100 million across the entire state. That's only a piece of that package. There's another $100 million plus that's specifically for stewardship, land management practices, acknowledging that it's not just about protecting the land, it's also that more active role in the species and the health of that forest as well. But it is expensive work.
Hi, I'm Mary Westervelt. I'm speaking now representing the Tredyffrin EAC. And Tredyffrin is really proud of its stormwater regulations, which affect new growth in the floodplain. And the frustration I have is that there's a lot of development at the tops of the ridges where the streams start, and a lot of runoff, a lot of stormwater, which causes a lot of erosion, and by the time the water gets to those floodplains, it's already really degraded. I love the idea of just adding 1 cent, 1 cent to the taxes and using that for some some changes in land management. I guess what I'm seeing is that if homeowners would do something besides turf grass at the top of the ridge, and if they would then treat the soils properly so the roots were stronger, things like that, we'd have a lot better chance. What sort of tools can you suggest for making that happen?
Sure. I would, depending on where you live and who your partners are, the nonprofit community is, and certainly many of the organizations that Peter and I work with through the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, whether or not you're in the geography, the boundary that they're focused on, those organizations are working in many cases statewide, certainly regionally, certainly across wider footprints. And they are great connections, and the Riverkeeper Network itself is a great connection to the resources available to do that, do those homeowner practices. Reach houses and reach individuals about making those changes to their properties, taking out impervious pavement, putting in porous, putting in the rain gardens, disconnecting their downspout, doing planters, and certainly you can never have enough trees, in my opinion. So planting those trees at the curb line, in the backyard, wherever you can fit them.
We need regulations that restrict ridgetop development too, and that's
Well, so
that's
it's
lot.
already developed.
Yeah, well then,
And so- and
then
what-
we're into this.
What I hear from the township engineers is you can't tell people what they can plant on their property, that, homeowner rights. And what I want to say is, we can tell them they have a responsibility to the whole watershed and to themselves.
Incentives.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not regulation and zoning, I think there is a lot of room to use those tools, so they're not out there. Sometimes they're hard, right? Sometimes there is pushback, and that's when the education becomes so important. But incentives also, as Peter's mentioned.
The New Jersey Highlands has this program, River-Friendly Communities, in which they've worked with landowners to, change the way they're managing their land and to use less pesticides on lawns. And it's a consensual kind of branding program, like, oh, I'm part of the river-friendly community. So it doesn't carry the weight of regulation. It doesn't really have any financial compensation, and that's the challenge. You're kind of appealing to people's sense of virtue, which is hard.
Look what we're doing.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Well, I'm Jim Moore, French and Pickering Board. We want to thank you for helping us on our Warwick Furnace Farm project. So
Well,
thank
that
you
too.
for that. Also, I'm sort of representing the nascent Great Marsh Institute. My question is, I hear lots about trees, but what about wetlands and marshes? I live in the middle of Great Marsh, which is the watershed for Marsh Creek, and there are no trees there. And if we planted them, the beaver would chop them down. So we got wetlands. So how does that fit in with trees? I guess that's my basic question.
Well, there are a lot of scientists in the room I see that can answer these questions with more authority. Wetlands are important, they certainly are, and we don't discount them, and actually it was part of one of the criteria that we looked at and also in this one of the 7 factors that I used on that index around sort of ability to produce clean water. So it's absolutely a factor, and we don't discount it at all. And there's no sense in going and planting a bunch of trees in the middle of that marsh. So
Part of the reason to highlight forests is the question of vulnerability. So wetlands absolutely provide all those same ecosystem benefits, water quality benefits, but the protections for wetlands, federal protections for wetlands, are much, much stronger. You can raise a forest, for development, no problem. Fill in a wetland, good luck. I hope you have 10 years and a really high-powered lawyer.
Paul, last question?
Yes. Paul Kusko, I'm from Phoenixville, about 10 miles down the river. Here representing my interests, like the lady did earlier with municipal trees. I was tree commissioner for a number of years, and we have a situation that sounds similar. We had a lot of post-World War II planting with developments, all hardwoods. So here, 80 years later, we have these large trees that are mostly oak and dying and stuff. And we've just recently in a situation where our borough council, in a way to deal with it, came up with a plan to take all the trees down. They want 10 years, they want to remove all the large trees in the borough and replant them with other trees. I'm not particularly, and these are the trees that are catching the water and stuff like that. Where does the municipality get help to manage something like this, to work on the trees and kind of save them? You mentioned something about carbon credits. Can a municipality apply as a carbon sink and get funds to put more trees in and maintain them? It comes down to dollars. So the officials are looking at the budget all the time. And currently, the borough doesn't manage all the regulated trees. We have about 2,400 trees in our inventory. They want to shift that burden to the homeowner, which is going to create several hundred tree managers instead of one. So these aren't particularly comfortable municipal planning processes, according to the way I look at it. And as an individual, it's kind of hard to fight it, but I'm trying. So any insight?
Sure. Go ahead.
It's a tough one, but I would ask you to repeat the township you're from, because I know that there are folks in this audience who provide some of these services. So.
Well, we're Borough of Phoenixville. We're surrounded by Schuylkill Township, East Pikeland, Charlestown, East Vincent, and so forth. We're on the French Creek. We're in the low quality area because we're the outlet. We're the
Gotcha.
joints.
So, and there are organizations like, local organizations like Natural Lands and Brandywine Conservancy, Pennsylvania Environmental Council, who have this expertise and are interested in helping folks work with municipalities. Even the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission does a lot of work to help municipalities and address their kind of capacity needs, capacity gaps around planning and sustainable planning, right, for these conservation outcomes. And then I know too, also, we heard from our speaker. I know other colleagues in the audience, are part of these environmental advisory committees and these EACs, who are also, I've seen be a really effective tool for liaising with municipal government and representing those kinds of concerns. I don't know if Peter could add.
Well, I
That's
don't have.
actually where the fight is. I mean, in terms of trying to improve things. With groups like EACs, our tree commission and so forth. I mean, we have a tree commission that's actually at odds with the borough council that has funded it and spawned it. So it's, we know that technology and what we need to do, it's coming down to dollars. So it's that funding source. I think the councilmen are not unreasonable. They would come around. But I don't know if any other municipalities are having this kind of issue.
So funding sources in Pennsylvania at the state, there's a guide, Finding the Green, that you can check out that the Growing Greener Coalition maintains. Peter referenced some other resources. I know finding the funding is always a challenge. I would also mention or plug, iTree, a tool by the Forest Service. So doing some of that case making, and I mean to solve the kind of the politics, the small p politics question. It comes down to education. It comes down to speaking in a language that's going to resonate with whoever that stakeholder is. So.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Nathan. Let's give him a round of applause.